and welcome to My Brain is a Wonderland, a podcast for neurodivergent women and the people who love them. You are here with your host Emily, and today we are going to be talking about phobias. I think a lot of people struggle with phobias. I've definitely met other people who have phobias, but I'm wondering if they are more prevalent in the neurodivergent community. And I say that because I did a little bit of research before this episode, just because this is a little bit more, medical science-y based. So I wanted to get a little bit of a perspective. And I was doing some research and I found that 50% of people with ADHD suffer from an anxiety disorder, which I definitely do. I was diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder and social anxiety disorder. And I think when you have an anxiety disorder, you get anxious about a lot of different things, and that can maybe lead to a phobia. In addition, I looked up some information about autism and phobias. And what I read about that is that autistic people experience similar things to non-autistic people. It's just that oftentimes what they experience can be more intense. So when you're hearing an alarm go off, right, if you're neurotypical, that's annoying. You're at work and the fire alarm goes off. If you're autistic at work and the fire alarm goes off, that could send you into a sensory autistic meltdown, right? And so if you have fears, anxieties, and you're autistic, that can progress into a phobia because you experience those fears and anxieties and exposure to things that can be scary very intensely. And as someone with both ADHD and autism, it is not surprising that I was diagnosed with 3 different phobias, which I'm gonna get into because this was on if you listen to the first ever episode, this was on my report from when I was diagnosed with ADHD and autism. And it was actually hilarious. I'll talk about it. One of the phobias I just think speaks to being autistic and having ADHD, just being neurodivergent in general. Before we get going, I just want to define what a phobia is real quick so we know what we're talking about, because a phobia is not the same as a fear, right? You could have a fear of, I don't know, you could be eating a poisonous blowfish. Is that the poisonous one? I'm thinking of the Simpsons episode, where the chef has to cut it just right to eliminate the poisonous elements of the fish. So it's this delicacy in Asia, and if you're really rich, you get to eat it. But if you develop a fear of that, I think that's pretty rational, right? You're eating a fish that is poisonous, you could die from it. That's a pretty legit fear. If someone tells you this area of the ocean is packed with great white sharks and you're going to go snorkeling, I think to be afraid is pretty rational. But a phobia is a fear or are fears that are not rational in their intensity or, let's say, subject matter. So that could be, I remember when I was growing up in England, there was this awful show where you'd have to confront they called them fears, I think, but really they were phobias. And there was a woman who had a phobia of oranges. I will never forget this episode. And they made her, I think you won money if you could confront your fear, right? And they put her in a tank, or asked her to walk into a tank full of oranges. And the woman was an absolute basket case. She was a mess. And that's a phobia, when you shouldn't really be afraid of oranges in general, right? That is an irrational fear that has developed, and that's what a phobia is. So let's talk about the 3 phobias that I was diagnosed with. They're on my report that I have right here. I was diagnosed with, in addition to that, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I was diagnosed with 9 different disorders, including 3 phobias, when I went for my psych assessment to assess for ADHD. At the time, we thought it was ADHD with my therapist, and then maybe autism, and autism came out of it. But the 3 phobias are, 1, they're all called specific phobia, comma, and then what the phobia is. Specific phobia, animal. I'm going to tell you a story later, but the animal is a snake. Snakes are a phobia of mine, which I think some people would say it's not irrational, right? That snakes have kind of been portrayed as these kind of disgusting, slithery beings. Some of them are venomous, so they can hurt you. They can seem a bit scary, but it is actually quite irrational. I grew up in the UK. Most of the snakes there have been hunted into extinction. I never saw a snake in the UK. There's, I think, less than 5 that exist, 5 types, and I grew up in London. I never saw a snake. Well, guess what? When you move to Florida, you see snakes. They hang out in your yard. They live large out in Florida. Yay. And there are some venomous ones in Florida that I've actually seen in person, and that's not fun. But in general, this phobia is absolutely irrational, based on nothing. Well, not nothing, I'll tell you later where I know where that phobia came from. So that's number 1. Number 2 is specific phobia, blood injection injury. And that is health related. I have had a phobia of needles in the past. It's subsided a little bit if you've listened to the health anxiety episode previously. It's subsided a little bit, but I still get very anxious just going to, a Walgreens to get my flu shot. I'm not in a good space. Blood draws, not in a good space. I get kind of faint in hospitals. I've had panic attacks. I've had 2 panic attacks in my life that I was able to rein in and not fully reach that point where you're absolutely losing it and can't breathe. And they were both related to health. So I definitely have a health anxiety phobia that is difficult to control. And the third one, which is the one I think is just absolutely hilarious, and anyone who's neurodivergent with a phobia or just neurodivergent will understand this. It says specific phobia, natural environment. I mean, what that says to me is I have a specific phobia of the world, right? Natural environment, so I walk outside and I'm terrified, which they're not wrong. But what they are actually referring to is my fear of the ocean, I think. I don't do well in the ocean. I don't like the ocean. I don't like the water. I don't want to be in it. It's absolutely terrifying. I like to be around water. I grew up on an island, the UK. I know, shocking. It's an island. So I was around a lot of water. I went to college in England by the beach. Then when I was an exchange student in the in the US, I was at UC Berkeley, which is in the Bay Area, and now I live in Tampa, the Tampa Bay Area in Florida. And whenever they say Bay Area, it's because they have a lot of water. There's a bay, kind of an inlet there, and we're by the ocean. So I don't like to be in the ocean. Absolutely freaking not. No thank you, no thank you, no bueno. I remember one time I got into the ocean with my husband in Jamaica, and we just kind of plopped in off of the side of this restaurant, and I was like, okay, I'm good. Everything's fine. I'm good. And I had my goggles on, and my husband said, look under the water, like duck your head down. And there was a kind of a little rock sticking out of the water where he said that, and I could see that rock, and I was right by it. And I looked under, I stuck my head under the water, and that rock was about the size of a building under the ocean, and I completely panicked. The ocean makes me feel just so small, and everything is so vast and terrifying, and it's so dark in the distance. I just don't freaking like it. So I've had these specific fears, definitely of the ocean, of blood, injections, health, and snakes for a very long time. I spoke about it in the health anxiety episode, but maybe when I was 7 or 8, I had my first blood test. Did not do well. You can go back and listen to that. And the ocean, I'd just never really been in the ocean growing up in London. There's, you might go to a pool, and that's, 8 to 12 feet deep maybe, and you can see everything, and it's very relaxing, and I liked that. But I do not like the ocean. With regards to the snakes, I'll tell you how that came about. It's actually quite strange, and it's not related to experiencing snakes at all. When I was growing up, and if you've listened to my podcast, I grew up quite poor in government housing. The projects is what you would call it in the US. And I would stay overnight at my grandparents' house, which was also government housing. This is the second house that they had. They were in a tiny apartment, government housing, when my mom was growing up. And then as she became a teenager, they moved her into a slightly bigger house, 2 bedrooms. And so my grandparents were in 1 bedroom, and the second bedroom, once my mom and her sister grew up and left, they put a snooker table in there, a pool table, and we would stay overnight there. I would sleep under the snooker table. I was a child, I was little, we'd put a little, mattress or a futon or maybe just a blanket, I don't even know, and lay under the table. And I remember waking up from a nightmare one night when I was a young child, sleeping under that table, or I was having the nightmare and then woke up. And the nightmare was that all the walls and the floor became snakes. They just kind of, when you're looking at a wall and it starts to warp, and then it just becomes snakes. This is like a horror movie. And I remember waking up under the table in the dark with my mom right there, sleeping as well, and absolutely panicking and just being a mess, just like not loving that at all. And I've thought about this, where that might have come from, because like I said, I'd never seen a snake in the wild. I had maybe seen a snake once or twice at like a zoo in a tank, maybe. But I'm wondering, and this just came up because the new Indiana Jones movie came out, and I was obsessed with Indiana Jones as a child. And he hates snakes, right? He's fearless, but he has a fear or a phobia of snakes. And I'm wondering if it kind of came from that. If me watching those movies, I'll explain a little bit more, but that the fear and anxiety I had, I latched onto this relation of, Indy has that fear of snakes, and so I'm afraid of snakes. And what I've realized over time, because I still get this same nightmare now, very infrequently, but when I am very, very stressed, very anxious, if I'm stressed at work, if I'm having issues in my relationship, if I'm upset, if anything isn't going right in my life, which is probably once a year, maybe twice a year, this nightmare will come up, where I'm all of a sudden thrust awake because our wall was becoming snakes. Basically what happens is I wake up in my dream, but I'm still dreaming, right? And I wake up in the room that I'm sleeping in, so I think I'm awake, and then the walls and the floors become snakes, and then I wake up again. And that is the anxiety dream that comes up. And so I'm wondering if I was anxious, stressed during that time as a child, and then I linked that anxiety and stress to watching Indiana Jones, being afraid of snakes. Like my brain just said, well, you need something to be afraid of, and you've seen this guy be afraid of snakes, so now you're afraid of snakes. And it's absolutely, I was going to say debilitating, only when there's a snake around, which, like I said, in the UK and in the Bay Area, San Francisco, there are no snakes there. But I live in Florida now. So I'm going to tell you the latest, absolutely hilarious, silly story about this phobia engaging with real life. So I was letting my 2 dogs outside through our back door, and when you let them out, they go onto a covered porch that leads to the yard. And I opened the door, and there was a black racer snake on the porch. A black racer is very innocuous. Is that the right word? Doesn't harm you, right? They eat rats, they eat bugs, they eat the things that you don't want around. So they're actually very shy, very sweet, they won't hurt you, and they just kill the vermin you don't want around. But I'd left a bowl of water for the dogs on the porch in summer, and I think the snake had come onto the porch to drink some water because it's so freaking hot in Florida. And I open the door and there's a snake there. And one of my dogs doesn't care. He loves animals. He's like, whatever, cool. The other dog, she's a hunter. So she'll hunt bees, lizards, and she saw this snake and started, like, slapping him or her. I don't know about what gender this snake was. They, them, who knows. And she started slapping the snake with her paws. And I'm screaming at her, and you can't control her, really, when she is trying to, hunt something. You have to grab her collar. But I wasn't going to get anywhere close to that. And the snake started frantically slithering because it was being, attacked by my dog. And it started moving very quickly towards the door that I had open into our house. And nope. No, that is the one thing that cannot happen in my life. A snake cannot be in my house. So I slammed the door shut with both dogs still outside with the snake. And you have that little crack under the door. The snake's body slammed into the door, so it would have come inside. And right next to the door, we have furniture. And I think maybe it slithered behind the furniture, but I have no idea. It just slammed against the door. So now I'm panicked. I don't want the snake in the house at all. My husband's at work until 7 p.m. This was probably like 11 a.m. I even texted him right after, like, are you coming home for lunch? Oh my freaking God. But now we have an issue where I'm inside and my two dogs are outside with a snake. And I'm not afraid of the snake hurting them, but I love animals, and there's two things I can't deal with. A snake in the house and my dogs killing an animal, even if it's a snake. Like, what am I going to do? I open the door and one of my dogs has a bloody dead snake in its mouth. Oh my God, just end my life right now. So, thankfully, next to the door where you let the dogs out into the yard onto the porch, I have a bedroom next to it that also has a sliding glass door that leads onto the porch. So I'm like, okay, I'm not going to open the back door that they just went out in and out of and I closed, that the snake slammed against. I'm going to open the sliding door and call the dogs in real quick. I go to the sliding door, and we'd only been in the house for a year. I say only, ADHD, I'm sorry, I don't know how to open the door. There's two locks on it. One is a up and down, and one is a rotating. So you have to get them both engaged in the correct, fashion. They're not labeled, so I have to make sure these two locks are unlocked to open the door. The door is also sticky. It's hot in Florida, so the metal swells. So I can't tell if the door is unlocked or not, and I'm trying to pull this sliding door open, begging my body to do something. The dogs are standing by the door, and I'm shouting at them through the glass because I don't want them to be by the snake and hurt the snake. But I'm trying to get this door open. I didn't realize at the time because the adrenaline was shot through my body like crazy, but I pulled every muscle up the side of my right body, from my groin to my breast, my entire rib, whatever those ab side muscles are, completely wrecked. I can't get the door open. I'm pulling on this sliding door for 10 to 15 minutes, frantically texting my husband. I'm panicked. It's awful. I hate it. I just can't have the snake in the house. That's why I'm not going to open the back door. Because if I open the back door and the snake comes in, I've got 7 hours, 8 hours of hell where I just can't deal with it. So then I decide to make a plan. And let me tell you, this plan is absolutely ridiculous. And here's what I decide I'm going to do. We have a bathroom in the back of the house that also the window, if you open the window, you can see the backyard. So here's the plan. Instead of going out the back door, opening it and letting the dogs in, getting the sliding door open, I lay blankets and pillows all over the bathroom floor, and the sink butts up to the window, so there's pillows in the sink. And I decide, I'm going to slide out of the window into the yard. I do this, and days later, I am black and blue on the back of my thighs, my butt, my back. And the plan is to slide out of the window into the yard, and I'm going to pick up my 60-pound dog and 50-pound dog and throw them back in through the window. That's what the pillows and blankets are for, to cushion their landing. So I slide out the window. Let's just remember, when you're absolutely laughing at this, that my adrenaline is through the roof. I can't feel the bruises happening. It was a shock to me later how bruised I was. I couldn't feel pulling my muscles. It was so intense. So I drop out the window. Drop, key word here. I couldn't touch the floor when I got out the window. I had to drop to the ground. And I grab one of my dogs and very quickly realize that I cannot get my dog back through the window. The window is too high. So now here's what we have, is I'm out of the window in the yard with 2 dogs and a snake. And a frickin' prayer. So I panic and then realize, well, you can just go around onto the porch, you're in the yard, and look for the snake. And if you look for the snake and it's not there, just go in the back door real quick. So I do that. I gingerly, oh God, if I could have filmed this, ridiculous. I go onto the porch, I'm absolutely terrified, and my heart is beating out of my chest. I get to the back door, the dogs are following me, and I push the door to open it so we can all run inside, and guess what? I'd locked it from the inside before I jumped out the window. So that's locked. I can't get in the door. I can't get back through the window, and I have about 7 more hours before my husband would be home to help me. Okay, so what am I going to do now? I decide I'm going to go out the gate, out of our yard, and try to run around the front door and let the dogs in. Because now I've been on the porch and I don't see the snake, so I think I can let the dogs in through that back door that I've been avoiding for about an hour. Problem is, I can't lock the gate from the outside, so the dogs could get out of the yard. So I open the gate, push trash cans in front of the gate, pray to God, run to the front door, open the front door, run through the house to the back door, unlock it, open it, and the dogs come running in. There's no snake, and I slam the door closed, and it is the end of the freaking ordeal. This was about an hour of absolute terror and panic that if you don't have a phobia, it's hard to describe it, why you feel this way. Like I said at the beginning, it is an irrational fear, but it's linked to that nightmare. It's linked to that fear and trauma and anxiety that triggered that nightmare. And the absolute most hilarious thing is when I told my husband and my father-in-law 6th generation Floridian, husband 7th, they said, dude, that snake would have been gone off that porch in the first 30 seconds. Like, when it slammed into the door at the beginning and went probably behind the furniture, as soon as the dogs just moved away, I guarantee that snake just slithered away into another yard. And I was just, not happy about that. Not happy about knowing that I spent all that time. And then as the days went on, the muscle tears presented themselves. I mean, it was awful, the right side of my body. All the bruising, I couldn't sit down comfortably for a few days. It was really terrible. And I tell this story now as a joke and a humorous story to people because it's absolutely ridiculous. I mean, it is ridiculous. And I probably wouldn't care about it if I still lived in London or the San Francisco Bay Area. I'd never encounter snakes. I don't care if I'm afraid of them, whatever. But I see snakes pretty regularly in Florida, where I live now. And this snake that I'm talking about on the porch has lived on our porch for years now. And I find its skin casings around the house that are absolutely terrifying. I was scooping leaves the other day and scooped up its skin casing and almost lost my ever-loving mind. So I really want to work on this. I really want to work on getting rid of this phobia. The thing is, I don't think that exposure is the way to go. When I was first talking to people about this in my Floridian family, they really pushed for exposure. You know, if you just expose yourself to snakes a little bit at a time, you'll get better. The problem is the phobia is not related to actually engaging with snakes. It's not the root of it. The root of my phobia is an anxiety disorder, a trauma reaction that then my brain grabbed onto snakes, which I said earlier could be the Indiana Jones thing. I don't know. That just came to me recently. Like, I was like, oh crap, okay. But it took that anxiety and fear and just globbed it onto something that related to something else in my brain, and now you have a phobia of it, right? It's not related to me engaging with a snake. For example, my cousin, he was my adult cousin, my mom's cousin, I guess mine once removed or something. He had a phobia of frogs, but his phobia of frogs was from he'd gone to a lake when he was a child and he'd gotten chased by frogs. I don't know if they really chased him, you know, do frogs do that, or they were just kind of hopping at him or hopping around. But that's where his phobia came from. Maybe he was anxious that day anyway. Maybe it kind of, again, globbed onto that. But that was from a real experience. Is that irrational? I don't know. I'd have to talk to a therapist, because frogs can't really hurt you, right? Unless they're venomous, and in England they are definitely not. So is that irrational, classed as a phobia, or is that a real fear because he was quote-unquote chased by frogs? I don't know. But I really want to try to work through this, but I think the key is not exposure to snakes. I think it is this having to deal with anxiety and trauma, dealing with my anxious personality from having to deal with exposure to sensory issues I don't like, having to mitigate my symptoms because people are reacting negatively to me. And I couldn't tell you what was happening during the time when this came up and I had my first nightmare. But if you've listened to these episodes before, I was physically abused, mentally, emotionally. I was traumatized, went through a lot of trauma, so I can imagine that something bad had maybe happened that day or that week, or something was going on and this phobia came up. I don't enjoy having these phobias. I've gotten to snorkel. Like I said, I have an ocean phobia, and I can kind of snorkel for about 2 minutes before I just start panicking. But I love it in those 2 minutes where I'm like, okay, you can do this, you're doing it, you're breathing, you're fine, it's beautiful, the fish, the coral, love it. But I want to be able to be free of it, and I'm not exactly sure where to go with it. I think when you're neurodivergent, aren't you going to be anxious forever? I mean, I don't know. It seems like you'd have to live in a, whole different society or alternate dimension for you not to be anxious in general. So if you suffer, I'm going to say suffer because I definitely suffer from these phobias. If you suffer from any phobias and have any insight on this, I would love to hear from you. You can reach me at mybrainisaWonderlandpod@gmail.com and My Brain is a Wonderland on most platforms. Look at the show notes for where you can reach me, because I really need some more insight on this. Maybe I need to go see a phobia therapist. I'm sure there are therapists that deal specifically with phobias. And if you're enjoying what you listen to, I would love for you to leave a 5-star review wherever you're listening. It's very easy on Spotify, Apple, Google Podcasts. And I will see you again for another episode of My Brain is a Wonderland, Season 2. I hope you have a good day. Bye-bye.